good morning. Michelle here with My Designs in the Chaos, where it's my goal to develop, encourage, and grow your crafting talent and confidence. And right now, we are in a series called The Daily Dose of Design. Today's episode number 22. And I think that you are going to love today's episode because today's episode revolves around the question, how do I actually learn how to design? It feels a little overwhelming. And so this comes from several different emails and messages that we've gotten, which, by the way, if you have a question that you would love to have answered in the Daily Dose of Design, send it to this email that's scrolling across your screen right now, info@mydesignsinthechaos.com, and maybe your question will be featured in one of our Daily Doses of Design. Also, if you would love these in your inbox every single day, then make sure to click the link right up above. Now, for today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about the framework that I've created for how to actually learn how to design. Because this is a question that I get all the time. Like, okay, I now know what an SVG is. I now know that I want to go down the route of learning how to design them, but where do I start? Like, what do I do? I've got my software. I've decided I'm going to use Inkscape, or I've decided I'm going to use Illustrator. And each one of these topics, by the way, are a different episode that I have talked about previously. So I encourage you to dive into those if you are wondering like more details on any of those things. But you're kind of at a place now where, okay, I know that this is what I want to do, but now what? Where do I even begin? And so today I want to share a framework with you that I've actually created that has taught thousands of people how to design their own SVG files, where tons of those people have gone on to open their own digital design shops and created their own online businesses. Now, you don't have to do that, but you'll have the ability and the knowledge to be able to if you want to. So the framework I want to talk about today will just walk you through how to actually go about learning how to design, because there's a whole bunch of different layers when you're first learning how to design. There's a whole bunch of things that are involved. There's so much information out there. Sometimes it can feel like, I'm sifting through all this stuff. What do I actually need to be able to create these things? And so I'm going to give you that framework this morning. Now, I will say as a caveat, I go into much more in depth in this inside of our class 123 SVG, but I am going to share that framework with you today. So step number one on where to go once you are ready to learn, once you have your software and you're sitting inside your software and you're like, okay, now what do I do? Step number one that you need to do is you need to familiarize yourself with the buttons and the controls that are inside your software. So that could be by pulling in another SVG file and utilizing all the buttons and things like that, using somebody else's design, just kind of playing around with it. You're going to want to, there's probably a toolbar over on the left-hand side. Get familiar with what are those tools across the side? What are the tools across the top? I will tell you that there are going to be a lot of duplicates, meaning there's probably a tool on this side. There's probably a button that does the same thing on this side. There's probably a button at the top that does the same thing on this side. A lot of the graphic design software programs are like that because you can make them customizable and everybody has a little bit of a different workflow. And so that's step number one, is familiarize yourself with the menus and the buttons so that you can establish a high quality workflow as you're starting to create. Step number two in this framework that I teach is I encourage you, once you're kind of familiar with the buttons, start becoming familiar with using text. So in step number one, you're utilizing possibly somebody else's design where you're kind of familiarizing yourself with the buttons. Step number two, you're going to start adding in text to your design. So pick out a phrase, maybe just using your name, using your family's name, and you're going to start kind of playing and manipulating with text. Now, text can get super, super in-depth. There's so many fun things that you can do, but that's a great second step because you're still using something else. Like you're not on a blank screen like, okay, now what do I do? You're utilizing the text, and a lot of times that text can inspire you. There's so many really cool fonts that are out there. And so depending on what font you chose, you can like play around with font pairing, and there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do with text. So that's step number two in the framework, is start working with text. Step number 3 in the framework is now you're familiar with the controls and the buttons. Now you've also become familiar with the text. Now it's time for us to start becoming familiar with the shapes and graphics of our design software. Now, this is where the fun really starts to kick in, but it can also feel. And so I want to encourage you start looking at everything through the lens of shapes, and it will become a lot easier. But that's step number 3 in the framework. You utilize shapes to start building and creating your own graphics. From here, you can start combining the text and the shapes if you want. You can start taking that to the next level, totally up to you. But step number 4 in the framework is now you know the software, you are familiar with text, you've taught yourself the shapes. From there, it's time to learn the tools in your software to be able to actually draw on your own. Now, you might be saying, Michelle, I cannot even draw a stick figure. And I promise you, if you look at my stick figures, you're going to say, you can do what on the software? You can draw actually on the software. And you guys can see on the Daily Dose of Design that I did a few days ago, where I used the pen tool to actually draw out a heart. And so that's step number 4, is use the tools that are inside your software, whether it's the Bezier tool, the pen tool, the blob brush tool, the curvature tool. There's a lot of tools in there to actually start drawing and manipulating things. This is where you're really going to start to get some personalized designs going on. So that's step 4 in the framework. Step number 5 from this point is I encourage you to start utilizing photographs to trace and convert into SVG files. Now, there's lots of different cool things that you can do with this feature, but it's a great place in the framework because you familiarize yourself with a whole bunch of different aspects of the software. But when you start bringing in photos, whether it's something for you to handwriting to trace or a picture or an image, it just adds a new layer. And then you can add in text, you can add in a graphic, you can add those other skills you've been learning, but tracing, this is a great step for that. So that's step number 5 in the framework. And then finally, at the end, the last step of the designing framework that I have for you today is now at this point, you're pretty familiar with the software. It's time for you to add in your own creative touch. And you can do that via shadows and patterns and all types of different dimensional things into your designs. And so all the extras, all the extra things that you start seeing, that would be step number 6 in that design framework. And so this design framework, again, number 1, you become familiar with the buttons, like the program itself. Number 2, get comfortable with text. Number 3, start using shapes to start building things. Number 4, utilize the tools inside your software to actually start drawing the things yourself. Number 5 is start bringing in tracing. Where you're bringing in photographs and you're adding photographs into your images. And then number 6, you start adding in some extras, some patterns, some shadows, things like that. And from that framework, you will be designing in no time. So again, this answered the question, how do I actually go about learning? And again, this is a framework that I've used to teach thousands of people how to design their own files. And so I know that this technique works when you start from step number 1 and work your way to step number 6. If you have a question or there's something that you would love for me to answer or feature inside of our Daily Dose of Design episodes, make sure to send it over info@mydesignsinthechaos.com. If you enjoyed this episode or maybe you learned something new, I'd appreciate it if you showed it a little bit of love or maybe share it with a friend who needs to hear this framework or wants to be encouraged as they're on their designing journey, learning how to create their own SVG files. And again, if you want to get these in your inbox every single day, make sure to click the link in the description of the video, either above or below, depending on which platform you are watching it on. Y'all have a great day, and I will see you back tomorrow for episode number 23. Have a great one. Bye, y'all.